Well, hello and welcome to this extra special Real Talk edition of ExecuNet Masterclass. As always, I'm your host, Tony Vlahos. Starting a business doesn't mean you need to quit your day job. If you're wondering how to devote time to your side hustle while keeping your regular paycheck, you've tuned into the right conversation. With me today is someone who has done it. Today you will learn how this entrepreneur kept his day job while starting a business, and you might discover that maybe you can too. And I have a second guest with me who can help you with that. So real quick, the format for today's session. First, you should have received a short slide deck by now. Many of you are nodding. Yes, I can tell. That's great. If you're sure you have not, fear not. You can get the slides in PDF directly from the screen in front of you. Just look under the handout section on your right. And of course, if you have any trouble, you can chat into us, and my amazing colleague Kim will help you out. Second, this will be an advice-filled question and answer session. So please feel free to chat in questions, and I'll do my best to include them in our conversation. Lastly, very important, please complete your evaluation form before you go. We really want to know what today's session meant to you. Okay, with that, let me tell you a little about my two guests today. Keith Evans is Managing Director, Operations and Technology for McDonald Investment Management. Prior to joining McDonald, he was Chief Information Officer and EVP Operations Support for SP Plus Corporation, providing services in parking, transportation, facility management, and event logistics. Keith also has a variety of experience in the financial and strategic areas, working both within industry and in various consulting companies. He's an Oklahoma native. He's got a BA in Quantitative Economics from Stanford, an MBA from Kellogg, and he invested in his first franchise in September of 2016. Joining us to share his expert insight is Pete Kilfillan, no stranger to the ExecuNet stage. Pete is a nationally recognized franchise consultant. He's the international best-selling author of the book Hire Yourself. He's got a proven track record of changing people's lives. In fact, over the years, Pete has helped hundreds upon hundreds of ExecuNet members explore franchise ownership and successfully reset their career. With that, welcome, Pete and Keith.
Thanks, Tony. Good to be here.
Thank you, Tony.
Well, I'm glad you're both here. Are you ready to get started with some questions? And again, everyone, listen in, and as things occur to you, don't be shy. Just let me know what you'd like to learn from Keith. We're going to structure our conversation today into a few parts. We'll kick it off with just some thoughts around corporate life as Keith knows it. We're going to lean from that into a section I've called the tipping point, which is that moment in our lives where something's got to give, something's got to change, and we begin to do it, right? And then we'll turn to a section which I'm sure all of you want to know about, which is the switch, how you make that change to becoming an entrepreneur while keeping your day job. And lastly, some philosophical thoughts, all right? So with that, let's get started with corporate life. Keith, you are, of course, a product of corporate professional upbringing. Tell us, please, a little bit about the different companies you've worked for.
Sure, and thank you for having me today. I started my career, so coming out with an economics major, I ended up actually going into accounting, believe it or not, and I was in the tax side of Arthur Andersen, so a very large organization, professional services. Went back to graduate school after that and went to another large organization in Kraft Foods in the Illinois area. A couple of years into Kraft, made a move over to the consulting world, where I joined an internet consulting firm during the boom of the late 90s. Unfortunately, I also got the bust part in 2001. And after that was networking around, looking for my next role. Just through the networking process, ended up at Standard Parking, now called SP Plus, one of the largest operators of parking facilities and transportation, some other services. That's where I really switched from finance and consulting and picked up the IT role as well, so became CIO there. Went through a large acquisition where we really acquired our largest competitor and ran that merger acquisition. Ultimately worked myself out of a role there, and that was in late 2015. again, went through the job search process and networking, and ended up in financial services at an asset management firm called McDonald Investment Management. Much smaller than most of the organizations I've been with. We have got 57 people total.
So lots of changes along the way, shifts in roles and responsibilities. Overall, sounds like you've had a really successful career. Can you tell us, Keith, broad strokes, right? What have you really enjoyed about corporate life? And with great candor, of course, what have you not really liked so much about it?
Yeah, thinking about the organizations that I've been in and across my career, I think, one of the strongest points of, being in a corporate world is the team environment. Obviously, cultures can change across organizations, but thankfully, I had some very strong experiences in a couple of particular companies where the team culture and everybody really pulling together to accomplish the goal was very strong. I'd say obviously in a corporate world, you've got a little different level in terms of access to resources, whether that's dollars or people. And I think that leads to the third thing, which is really, I would say, the training and development component. And clearly, that's, I think, a more structured component of larger organizations, and can oftentimes give you a leg up in terms of progressing through your career. In terms of, I would say, more challenging things, obviously in some of these larger organizations, the bureaucracy and to some extent the politics, again, depending on the culture, could be issues. I had one particular experience where I was told that I had no chance for promotion until everybody that had been hired in the class before me was promoted. So it became clear to me that was not going to be a place I was going to be long term. I really like to progress on the merits of my own capabilities, and that was more of a time-based organization. So the only other thing that really comes to mind then is any organization that trends towards some form of stagnation. I'm just a big fan of continuing to learn and change, and I'm not a big fan of roles where it's just keep the lights on and make sure that we're plugging along day to day.
Yeah. Gosh, being told that what you share with us would take the air out of anyone's tires, right? So staying on that line of questioning for a moment, Keith, you've learned a few things. I mean, certainly all of us in our roles pick up what I'll call lessons along the way. Can you share a few of those from your corporate life with our audience today? What are some lessons you've learned so far?
Yeah, I would say, across the broader spectrum, obviously there's particular learnings in any specific function, but I would say in a more general fashion, first and foremost, from my perspective, it's about your relationship with people and taking care of, if you're in a management position, making sure that you're watching out for them, making sure that they've got the development opportunities, that you're really helping them grow, and also protecting them from the things that might be coming at them from above or from the side. I just see that your personal network and your reputation in the long run are what's most critical, in my opinion, to your success. And I became very aware of that as I entered the job market in late 2015 and realized that I'd let my network languish a little bit. So it's important to make sure you keep your personal relationships inside and outside the organization.
Right.
I would say another one for me was simply don't be afraid to ask for help. I'm sure in some organizations it may be viewed as a sign of weakness, but at least in my opinion, I think it's critical that people realize when they're bumping up against the wall and reach out, and it's much more productive to get to the end game by making sure the right people are involved in the context of getting something done. And for me personally, at the end of the day, it's about being curious and having a mentality of constantly learning. I think that's probably the most critical factor that I look for in people as I hire. And it's something that I try to continue to foster just as I go down the path, and particularly being in the technology space. It's rapidly changing, and you've got to stay on top of it.
Terrific advice for the rest of us. Let's pick up on that last one a bit, and with it, segue a bit into what I've termed the tipping point, your curiosity, right? Were you curious about life outside of corporate world, and if you could share with us a bit emotionally, where were you when you finally took that thought seriously and said, you know what, I need to explore something different from what I've been doing? Take us through that, Keith.
Sure. I would say I would label myself a reluctant entrepreneur at some level because I'll come back to close the circle on that. But certainly at the beginning, I grew up very risk averse. My parents were quite risk averse. It was go get good grades, work hard, and your career and your success will be dependent on that. And I witnessed my father was an attorney, and that's what he did, and he was very successful. In fact, he's still working at 80 years old in the firm that he joined out of law school. Unfortunately, that's just not the way of the world now, and that's what I saw in 2015 as we completed the merger acquisition, and I ended up working myself out of a role there. I honestly didn't think I was going to struggle as much as I did in the job search market at that time. Obviously, I'm a little older in the age equation, and I was making a decent amount of money, and I was trying to keep those standards as I went looking for positions. And there were just less and less opportunities for me. So I got lucky in that I had a opportunity. I would say about 3 or 4 months in, I got down to the final two, and they picked the other person. And I'm like, okay, this is fine. I've already gotten that far. It won't be long before I get to, something lands for me. Unfortunately, about, I would say 8 or 9 months into it, I was still looking, had activated the network strongly. It was making contacts all over the place, but it was just really struggling to get an opportunity that was a good fit for me. And that's when I really started to consider investing in really a business or a franchise opportunity at that point. I had listened, and interestingly, I was probably very similar to quite a few people on the call today, in that I was a member of ExecuNet. I was listening to webinars like this, and I actually listened to Pete give a webinar on the franchise opportunity, and that was early on as I entered the job market in early 2016. I kind of thought about it, and I was like, nah, it's not really for me right now. Not sure how real this really is, and I don't know this Pete guy. Turns out that we're on spring break that year, and my wife's talking to her sister-in-law, and turns out that her sister-in-law is good friends with Pete. So it helped me bridge the gap to go have a conversation with Pete, and it was a wonderful experience. Pete really took the time to really hear what I was going through, B, what I was looking for, and then really educate me on what the opportunities look like and what the different models were that I could pursue if I wanted to go down this path.
Right.
So I had gotten to a point by then that I was just not sure, that I was going to find another corporate job. So I was looking to take a little bit more control over my destiny. I knew I was still going to be continuing to look, but I just got to a point where I felt like I really needed to invest in myself and my family and make sure that we had some form of income and opportunity that wasn't going to be at the whim of a company and the merger acquisition space, or just an average lifespan of a CIO today is a little less than 5 years. So I could still be going through this exercise another couple times in my career, but I wanted to have something that provided a backdrop or a backstop in the case of another longer search. And hopefully it will replace my income over time, and I can step out of the corporate world based on my own circumstances.
Right. We're going to hear from Pete in a little while and get his take on that very same story, I'm sure. But a couple more questions before we turn to another portion of our talk today, Keith. So why did you invest in a business before taking a new executive role? Most people would do something different, right? You would find a new job and then maybe consider investing in a business, but you approach things differently. Can you riff on that a bit for us?
Sure. Again, it really came down to timing and kind of situation. Like I said, I wasn't sure how long it was going to take me to find my next position. Obviously, I'd gotten pretty far down the path, and I was struggling, to be honest. And I really wanted to I saw an opportunity to take some control. It was definitely scary in the fact that like I said earlier, I didn't grow up in a a risk-taking environment. Never really thought of myself as an entrepreneur. It wasn't my goal in life to go start my own business, but it was an opportunity to take control of my destiny, have some real interesting experiences, and move forward. So it just got to a point where it was time for me to make that decision, and literally I kind of had a fork in the road where I said I can take a very low paying job, which was out there as an opportunity, or I can make this investment. And fortunately we had enough savings to move forward with that decision.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, we're going to move into the part of our conversation that I'm sure everyone is leaning forward to listen to, which is what I've called the switch, right? Where you finally take that plunge, and in your case, keep that day job. I want to bring Pete into our conversation. Pete, you there?
I'm here.
All right, awesome. So totally unscripted, right? You have a conversation with Keith. What did you think? You thought, where is this guy coming from? And
So, Keith and I, we had the opportunity. If I remember, Keith, we met at a Panera, and Keith, very educated, very successful corporate executive, and I work with a lot of corporate executives, and having come from the corporate world, I kind of knew the place he was in because I had went through the transition, and we had a marvelous conversation. But it was clear that he really, in his heart of heart, wanted to take another corporate job. And as we got into it and we started talking, and I kind of started to tell him about the process, he expressed interest, and you can hear he's one to want to learn and stuff like that. So we went through the process, and I opened him up to this whole world of this idea that you can invest in a franchise and you can also have a corporate job, right? But as a backstop, get the business going, up and running, that protects you, diversifies your assets, your income. From that standpoint, just gives you some flexibility, or simply put, what he would say is control your destiny. And so we had a great conversation. We went through the process and all that kind of stuff, and it's fun to kind of see him do this. And you're seeing more and more people now. They're going and they're looking at not doing just taking a corporate job or just investing in a franchise, but they're looking at doing both. Very similar to what Keith does. And that's what we have a great opportunity here today, is learn about Keith's experience of doing both and handling them and putting in place a plan to protect his future by having this business on the side, building this asset, building this supplemental income so that he has options down the line. So we had a great experience with Keith, and it's exciting to watch him as he continues to thrive.
So I definitely want to hear about the process that brought Keith from where he was to where he is. But before we get to that, Keith, back to you. Why did you ultimately invest in a franchise business versus doing something different, like creating your own business concept or buying an existing business? A lot of executives, for example, also move into independent consultancy. They consider private equity. Why franchise ownership?
It's a great question. I would say it's a couple of things for me. The risk-averse nature comes into play for sure. I don't, my strengths in sales and marketing are not where I had built up my career and experience. So when I looked at what my opportunities were, I really was looking for more of a kind of, packaged solution, not necessarily a McDonald's per se, but something where the organization could really be the backbone of getting us up and running, and we could focus on kind of more operational, delivering the service or the product. I went through the process with Pete, and we'll talk a little bit about that, and looked at several concepts, and several of them just required you to, as the investor or owner, to really be out on the face in the front of it and drumming up sales. And I just knew that wasn't going to be for me. So I was really looking for that kind of a model where in conjunction with continuing to look for another corporate job, I knew that the real core of the business was going to be there and provided to a large extent by the corporate headquarters for the franchise, and that I could just help by making that investment, managing, helping manage people, making the right decisions about how we were going to get up and running.
Okay, let's turn to the process. And maybe, Pete, you could walk us through it. And Keith, if you'd like to contribute to what Pete can outline for us, that would be great. But Pete, do you want to walk us through the process you walked Keith through, and certainly is the process you help other executives with?
Yeah, I think the most important part of the process is really taking an inventory, getting a very good understanding that, hey, if you were to invest in a business, what characteristics would you want that business to have, and what do you want to accomplish with it? So Keith and I did what was called a consultation, and we spent about 75 minutes talking, and I just asked questions with this idea that I wanted to learn about him. I wanted to learn about his comfort level as it pertains to doing business development and how important is status to him? And is he comfortable managing people? And what did he want to accomplish with the business? What kind of income did he want? And all that kind of stuff. And so we went through a pretty detailed conversation. And at the end of the conversation, I summarized back to him. So he knew I understood where he was coming from. And I took everything and I created a written summary. And I used that written summary then to go start researching franchises. And most people don't realize this, but there are franchises in every industry. There's over 3,000 different franchise concepts. And the deal is there are some good ones and there's a whole bunch of not good ones. And we want to stay away from the not good ones. And so I leverage a process that screens franchise companies. They'll literally meet with the leadership teams to review the financials. And most importantly, they'll talk to franchisees to make sure they're satisfied. So I went and did my research. I came back about a week later and shared some franchise concepts with Keith. Presented it to him, got him connected to those franchise companies, and then I was a coach for Keith. And Keith and I had a call once a week with this idea that I'd continue to teach him about franchising. I would give him resources. I'd make sure the franchise companies could take good care of him from that standpoint. With this whole idea is that my job was really just to be a matchmaker and a coach as we went through this process to ultimately help him decide if it was right for him or not. But we gave him all the information, got him in front of some great companies, and he did his diligence and ultimately moved forward.
Now, Keith, ultimately, what was the type of business you invested in?
It's a boutique fitness concept.
Awesome. Did you have any prior experience in the fitness industry?
No. Yeah, I chuckle. You may have seen my headshot, but you didn't see the rest of it. So, I mean, I think that was also an interesting learning for us as we went through the process. Is to Pete's point, there are a ton of concepts out there, and I chuckled when Pete mentioned, he asked the question about status because it just triggered with me. I think when we were having that conversation, he asked the question, rightfully so, and then he said, for example, if you were going to make a lot of money, but it was going to be a porta potty business, would that matter to you? I'm like, no, it wouldn't matter to me, but I mean, it's a great question because there are so many things out there, and there are lots of factors that come into play. So, I didn't rule out a fitness concept just because I'm not terribly into fitness. I looked at the underlying business model, and Pete had already done some screening on it and told me that here's the pros and cons of each of the concepts, and then you go and do your due diligence per Pete's layout of the process, and
right.
Ultimately this turned out to be the best one for us.
Cool. So I'm getting a few chats from our listeners who are wondering the conversation you had with your wife when you went home. I said, honey, you know me, I'm not into fitness, but I'm going to invest in a fitness franchise. How did that go? Was she supportive? Was she shocked? Did you have to do a lot of song and dance? How did that conversation go?
Well, it certainly helped that Pete was a friend of our sister-in-law, so that started the process. But yeah, I think the most important thing from that, and Pete guided me this direction as well, is you really need to be thinking about your spouse or your partner as a partner in this equation, because regardless of how the roles and responsibilities turn out, it's a journey, and you've got to be thinking about how it's going to impact both of you. Fortunately for us, my wife had been in the working world years ago as a pharmaceutical sales rep and had stayed home for a number of years raising our children, but she was ready to kind of re-engage. So I think she got excited about it initially, and then we, did our work. I did most of the due diligence and kind of came back to her and gave her my insights, but she was a member of the process all along the way.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's lean from that into, I guess, a part of the decision making that could be nerve-wracking for anyone considering anything new, which has to do with the fear and anxiety of the risk of it, and specifically funding the business. How did you do that, Keith? How did you fund your business?
So we took personal savings, so not retirement savings, and we did not take a loan out. So it's an interesting decision as I look back. I think there's probably some maybe more discipline created by getting a loan or pulling something from your retirement, in that the spigot's kind of open, and we probably made some decisions in investing that I'm not saying we wouldn't have, but certainly when you've got say fixed amount through a loan and you're running close, you're going to make some decisions that are going to determine the course, and we had a little bit more flexibility by going into our personal savings.
Now, question for Pete.
Tony, maybe I touch on that a little bit.
Yeah.
Because, as we look at franchises, there is so many different ways in which you can leverage your available capital. And so what I tell people is that you can go get SBA financing, you can use retirement dollars, you can use cash or savings like Keith, you can, do all kinds of different things, use equity out of your house. And so one of the things that I'll help people with is I'll put them in touch with people that's all they do is help you figure out the best way to leverage your capital. Simply put, if you had all cash, maybe it's better not to use all cash. You keep some of your powder dry and leverage a combination of different assets or loans to best fund the business. And so there's many different options, but as part of the process, there are lots of resources that can kind of help you with that.
Okay, that's great to know. So resources being, or rather funds being, one issue. You said earlier that you weren't that sales and marketing guy. That's not who you are. It's not where you've built your executive reputation. So was there a significant learning curve, Keith, or a prolonged period of time where you struggled with your decision or with the business as it got off the ground? Tell us about some of the other challenges you faced and ultimately needed to overcome in order to move in that direction.
Sure. So, as I mentioned, I think I recognize it as a weakness or an opportunity for growth for me particularly, but that also then impacted the decision-making criteria as we looked at concepts. And our particular concept, the corporate office does a significant amount of, in particular, the online marketing, which is about getting people to our door. So that was very important in my decision-making process, because there were other concepts where it was going to be, you need to go out, you need to find the business, you need to think about, create your own marketing plans. And I kind of was able to bypass that. So the criteria definitely factored into making the decision about the concept that we chose. Skill set, I'm a work in progress. I'm learning with our staff, some of our staff and our manager in trying to improve my sales skills, because it's definitely a very much a sales-oriented business. But any business is, and I think it's just a skill set that we all have at some level. Those of us that maybe are more introverted or, finance or IT sometimes don't have as much exposure to it, but it comes into play in every part of life, and it's just a set of skills that are worth developing regardless of what opportunity you're looking at.
Absolutely. Question I'm getting from one of our listeners, and I'll turn to Pete for this one and get his perspective. Pete, what were some of the things that you heard Keith say to you that qualified in your mind as, these are things that are going to keep him up at night? I need to pin these down for Keith as he makes his decision to move forward. We've heard about funding the business. We've heard about skills. What other things that Keith or most other executives bring to your attention that you've got to help them with early on to help them make that right choice?
Yeah, again, it goes back to just listening and asking great questions and listening. And as we went through our conversation, so Keith talks a little bit about sales. And when we talk about sales, in most cases, it's not door-to-door sales down our neighborhoods or anything else like that. But you're in front of people, talking to people. So one of the things that I did when we were talking is I said, hey, listen, tell me a little bit about your comfort level in terms of business development and sales. And Keith, I don't know if you remember this, but on a scale between 1 to 10, you told me you were a 4, right? And from that standpoint, and that's the kind of stuff that we want to get in and really get a good understanding of what does sales really mean when we talk about a franchise. But number 2 is your comfort level with it, the ability to go and talk to people. If somebody invites you to their business or to their home, or somebody walks to the door of your facility and wants to learn about that workout or that massage or whatever it may be, bottom line is that it's that comfort level. So it's my job to kind of make sure I understand where they're coming from and then help them through that and find a franchise that matches kind of what their comfort level is or what they're looking for.
Getting another great chat that I want to share with you guys is around autonomy. And I'm going to interpret what I'm reading here, but of course, many of us at the senior levels are accustomed to having a great deal of authority, autonomy even, and certainly with that responsibility. But as we look at a franchise model, were you concerned, Keith, at all that you'd be trading in some of that autonomy to work with the, quote, corporate mothership that, in a franchise environment does have a lot of say in how things happen? What was your sense about that?
Yeah, I kind of went on to both ends of the spectrum on that one, because I really did want to kind of grow my own business and understand that I had the opportunity to impact my future. But I also wanted the structure of a corporate organization and a proven business model. So thankfully, again, it comes down to doing your due diligence as you look at concepts and making sure that not only are the financials and the underlying business model sound, but how does corporate react to its franchisees? Are you going to get the support that you need? Obviously, you're talking to other owners through the process, and it's just a set of questions that you need to get comfortable with.
Our listeners want to know, Keith, whether the location of your business was an issue for you. Is it near your home? Is it something you need to travel to every day to get to? Far? Tell us about that, please.
Yeah, so we didn't quite get through the process, but towards the end of the process, as you really narrow down to one or maybe two concepts, go to a discovery day. It's called a discovery day with the franchise organization, and really that's kind of a closing process in the context of signing deals. While we were out there, we were looking at one location or one area territory close to where we live. Fortunately, there happened to be two others, so we actually grabbed them as well, because I live in the Chicago area, and the rest of the Chicago market was literally gone as we left that discovery day that day. So there are definitely owners who have franchises well away from where they live. And again, it goes back to business model, and consequently, if we're in what's called a semi-absentee business model in the context that we're not engaged every day. The most critical component is hiring the right manager, and that's even more important when you're also remote in that equation.
Right. Keith, help us understand your timeline, meaning what was the total length of time it took you from the time you decided to become an entrepreneur to opening the business?
I chuckled because I just remember getting into the process with Pete, and I can't say enough, to be honest. The process that Pete has for this is really extremely helpful and actually comforting, because he doesn't give it to you all at once. He steps you through it, but it did get to a point where it was just a couple of weeks in, he brought concepts back, and he was like, okay, now it's time to do due diligence, and we need to be reaching a decision in 2 or 3 weeks. And I'm like, wait a minute, I haven't even decided to actually do this at all. I'm not ready to pull this trigger, but having the structure, the discipline, accountability kind of kept me to the process. So it was extremely important in helping me make that decision.
Mm-hmm. So was it a matter of months? Was it a matter of weeks?
Oh, I apologize. Sorry, I lost track of the
question.
Yeah. So I engaged with, between the time that I really engaged with Pete, it was about 2 months, 2.5 months maybe, before we bought the franchise. And then so that was September of 2016, and we opened in March of 2018. And most of the time in between was really finding the first location.
Okay. So you can probably anticipate what the follow-up question is, which is, from the time you decided to make the investment, how long before you had what we'll call cash flow?
So we had revenue month one, obviously, cash flow positive. It took us several months. It varies, again, depending on concept, location, how much you put into it. So there's documents as you go through this process around each franchise organization has to publish documents, and Pete can probably provide more detail on that, about average performance of their franchisees, and that really gives you some good solid information. But ultimately, it's talking to the other owners and understanding what their paths look like. And then as you get into it, we're still learning quite a bit. We only opened really 7 or 8 months ago, and even though you've got kind of a path for success in that the corporate organization gives you kind of a handbook, it's still you still got to work through a lot. You're starting a business, and to expect that it's going to just turn on and make money day one, that's not realistic. And I think that's one of the significant learnings that we've had over the last couple of months.
Okay. Well, we're going to turn to the final portion of our talk in just a few moments, where we'll learn more from Keith about life as a successful entrepreneur, and very importantly, how he manages corporate life with entrepreneurship. But Pete, before we turn to that, getting lots of chats about how Pete makes money. Pete, tell us about that.
So great. So I provide a free service. I am like a matchmaker. So I work with successful executives throughout the country, ExecuNet members, and really my role is to get to know them, get them in front of great franchise companies, take them through a very set process to help them in every aspect of it, do some coaching. And the way in which I get compensated is two ways. The first way is if somebody does invest in a franchise, I get a referral fee from the franchisor. So it's kind of like how a realtor's paid or an executive recruiter. So again, I get a referral from the franchisor. And number two is when I do a great job, I hope you refer me to other people. So that's kind of where I really grow my business is you say, you got to talk to Pete. He's the crazy bald franchise guy from that standpoint. And so that's what I do, and that's how I get compensated.
Okay, thank you. So Keith, you've been in the business for a while now. If you could go back in time, would you make the same decision, do it all over again, or are there enough reservations for you to say, you know what, I shouldn't have done this?
As I look back, I think I would absolutely do it again. Obviously, I'd love to have some of the learnings that I've had over the last year and a half or so up front, but I think the experience has been terrific. I'm very hopeful and confident that we will continue to be successful, and I really have enjoyed the experience of driving a business forward and having more control over my own destiny.
When we think about what you've taken on, you are managing a franchise, staying in corporate life, you've got a family. How do you do all of this? Clearly not all at the same time, right?
Not as far as my corporate organization knows. No.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
So
I mean,
you
again,
give us some concrete, is there a schedule? Is there something that our listeners who are contemplating this could really get their heads around in concrete terms around, okay, it requires X hours, it requires Y days. I mean, how does that work?
Sure. I can only speak to my own experience. Again, I think it starts with the concept that you're getting into, whether it's, fully absentee, semi-absentee, or you're directly involved. Obviously, it's going to affect the amount of time you spend. As a semi-absentee owner, I'm now spending between maybe 4 to 8 hours a week on the business. Obviously, there's weeks where it goes a little bit more and some that go a little bit less. I tend to keep a lot of things, and I'm doing some of them personally that other people might outsource to third parties, just because I enjoy it and I like to educate myself on those processes. I think during the ramp up period, it was probably 10 to 20 hours, and again, it really depends on how heavily you want to be involved or how do you want to leverage other people around you. So I think it's very doable on top of a corporate job, knowing that you're going to have some times when it's crazy. I've been through a large project implementation at work that was very stressful, and at the same time opening up the business. And there were definitely periods where it was challenging, but at the end of the day, I try to manage most of my franchise related activity either briefly at night during the week or Saturday mornings when we're meeting with our manager and just kind of going through the financials and reports of activity.
Okay, so it really doesn't cut into, nor do you allow it to cut into your day-to-day at the corporate job, correct?
Correct.
Right. Good to know. And I am getting this question. I will ask it. You give us some sense here, Keith. What percentage of your income would you say is from corporate versus franchise these days? Rough estimate.
So the franchise percentage is relatively small right now because we're still getting up and running. The goal, based on the numbers that I saw when I went through the process and the disclosures from the franchisor, there's a potential to come close to equaling my corporate earnings if we were to open all three of our locations and get them to where we believe they can successfully be.
Wow. Well, that's exciting. Wow. So, question
and I
for
think
both.
it's also important to note, Tony, that he's building an asset.
Right.
So, from the standpoint is not only is it income, but it's also building an asset that someday, if he wants to sell her, it can be a legacy, or use it as a kind of a semi-retirement income down the line. So, from that standpoint.
So let's stay with that thought, though. Keith, you're building an asset, but clearly there was an upfront investment. When you look back at it, probably when you had to make it, it was daunting. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I've got to spend this much, whatever that amount was. And I know it's tough to pinpoint it to an average, so Pete probably could do that a little bit. How do you feel about it now when you look back and say, I needed to do this, put this much money in, but where I am now, is your general feeling the return was there or it will be there soon enough, so I don't regret that? Is that your feeling about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think going into it, probably the most daunting experience I had was signing a lease for the location because it was the first long-term commitment outside of writing a check for the franchise initial franchise investment itself. All of a sudden it's becoming very real that you've got a term, a much longer horizon that you're really committing to, and that was exciting. I apologize. I've lost the question again, Tony.
Oh, it was simply when you consider how much you need to invest to get started up front. Fast forward to where you are now, any regrets around what you had to spend to get started? No.
I'm confident that the return will be there. That's one of the things that I looked at as I was going through the process. You talk about being in a corporate world. There's obviously risks of turnover now higher than ever in the context of careers. The job market's actually good now, but also in the context of investing your capital. If you're in the stock market, there's as much risk there, and we're obviously seeing it over the last couple of weeks. And I'd like to believe that this is a very solid investment in the context of where we can go and the diversification of where we've got things invested.
Right. Now, Pete, is this the mind frame of most executives you talk to who clearly have to fund the business? In Keith's case, it was cash savings. We've touched on SBA loans. There's always retirement savings, home equity. There is a lot, or at least there was. Somebody already took care of that. So is that something that most executives, Pete, struggle with as part of the decision-making? Is it the greatest consideration for them, or is there something else that seems to get in the way early on and hinders their progress?
No, I think it's something that's always a concern for somebody. You're taking your savings or you're putting your name on some debt, right, a loan. But I think what a lot of people look at it is it's a return on their investment, and they're trying to diversify their assets, their income. And so let's say it costs you $250,000 to get a franchise business up and running, all in, paying the franchise fee, building out the facility, all that kind of stuff. And that business ends up starting to generate for you, call it $125,000 once it's established going. And then that's, kind of on a going basis, that's a 50% ROI in your invested capital. That's very good. The other thing people will tell me is that when they're investing in the business, their money is invested in them, and they're in control of their investment, opposed to being in a mutual fund or in a stock or stuff like that, where they don't have control. When it's your business, you're living it. You are kind of sitting on your investment, and the idea is to get a good return and build an asset.
Keith, when you consider what the franchise has meant to you, and I'm not talking about the financial rewards or the promise of that you've outlined for us, What are you thankful for when you consider that you have this additional asset in your life?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. Obviously, there's back to the kind of controlling your own destiny. And to Pete's comment, we're really investing in myself, my family, and an asset that's going to be there for us for a while. I think, interestingly, I came from obviously a finance consulting kind of background, and I'm very kind of business mindset. So when I was looking at concepts, I was really looking at the financial model and how this thing was going to perform. Interestingly, as we've gotten into it, being in the fitness space, we've got a great community of people that are our members, and that's been surprising to me, and I'm thankful for that because it's really just made it a much more personal experience, and I think much more enjoyable for us as a result.
So one other question. I'll start with Keith, and then Pete, please add to anything Keith will tell us. But Keith, why do you think more executives don't diversify their assets and income by keeping their corporate job and investing in the business? It clearly is something that appeals to you, works for you, and will work more as you continue. But fundamentally, are you puzzled why more executives don't do what you did?
At some level, yes. I mean, I think it comes probably, if I look back at my own experience, I would say it came down to three things, right? Fear or risk, risk aversion, just simple lack of knowledge of what this space or opportunity might look like, and then simply, at some level, everybody's very busy. You get comfortable in your existing life, and this is a substantial change, and you've got to be prepared for that, and you've really got to make sure you've got the energy and the motivation to do it. So I can see I see a lot of people that get on a path and inertia continues to carry you forward, and there's obviously lots of people that are very successful in that kind of a path. I was at a point in my life where my inertia had stopped and I needed to restart, and this was a great opportunity for me to do that.
Well said. Pete, anything you'd like to add to what Keith just said?
Yeah, I think it's fear, the fear of the unknown, fear of failure, and this idea that what we try to do is mitigate risk as much as we can with the franchise. They've got the systems, the processes, and stuff like that. So it's getting past that fear. Number two, and I see more and more of this, is this false sense that a corporate job means career and income stability. And it's nothing further from the truth now. The job market is better right now, but we're also seeing lots of mergers, acquisitions, and downsizings. Again, it's starting over. And so the average person now keeps a job for 4 years. So it's much different than when we all kind of started, graduated from college and got a job. And so the world is, if you're 52, and you've been in a job for a few years, you may be at risk. And so I submit to you that it's not stability or security anymore. And owning your own business, nobody can ever walk in and tell you you're laid off, they're going in a new direction, we got a new leadership team, whatever it may be. You're in control of it. And the last thing I would tell you is that, we kind of go to what the easiest path is, and taking another corporate job is the easier path in the short term. And owning a business is work. It is hard work. Anybody that invests in a franchise, one of the things that I do is I have a now that you're a franchisee speech. And Keith, you probably remember it. One of the first thing I said is, hey, listen, franchise does not mean you don't have to work, right? Businesses, it takes work to get them off the ground. It's like a plane getting off the runway. It takes a lot of power. Once the plane gets off the runway, then they get up to a certain altitude, they can pull back the power. But it's work, and you have to be willing to, take a step out and challenge yourself a little bit to do something new, to take control of your destiny.
Well said. Our audience is looking at this last slide that's been up here for a while. It's pretty straightforward, but tell us, Pete, when they talk to you, and again, it's a no cost, just kind of chat with you, what can they expect from that consultation with you, Pete?
So I think, first of all, my job is to educate and provide lots of resources. And so I'm a bestseller in my book, Hire Yourself as a Bestseller on Amazon. And it's really, again, designed to educate people on franchising and looking at and investing in franchises. So my job as you go through a consultation is a couple things. One, to learn about you, to really get a good understanding that if you were going to do this, if you're going to take the path of exploring franchises, what's important to you and what do you want to accomplish with the business. So I have a very set process. So the idea is, one, I'm kind of taking through a process, helping you learn about, again, what's important to you, what you want to accomplish. I'll educate you on different things of franchising, and then I'm there as a coach. So the whole idea is I'm giving you lots of value. It doesn't cost you anything down the line. You never sign anything. You never pay anything. But really, I'm just taking you on a journey, on exploration. So you can get a free consultation. You can get a free copy of my book. I even have a Hire Yourself supplemental resource guide that's extra materials from that standpoint. So I'm all about helping people and giving them tons of value as they go through the process.
Terrific. Keith, one last question for you, then we'll start to wrap this up. Now you've been a franchise owner for a while. Are there things you've learned about business and leadership and life at large that have actually helped you in your corporate day job? Any lessons that you've ported the other direction?
Yeah, I'd say a couple areas. I think reinforced and strengthened kind of the people side of the equation for me. Like I said, not just hiring staff much more directly, but really the idea of, that business is now like a family in the context of not only the employees, but even it extends into the members. So again, just the relationship with people, I think, is extremely important and continues to play a significant role. And clearly, not that I'm going to be there. I might be a 5 now, Pete, but developing my sales experience, business development, is also an important part of the equation. It's definitely made me more comfortable, at least reaching out and trying to figure out how I can do that and help others in our organization do it as well.
Okay, wonderful. Well, we're going to wrap this up. Keith, thank you so much for making time for us, telling us your story, taking us on that journey with you, and sharing what you've learned along the way. Pete, as always, you're a tremendous resource. Thank you for making time and sharing your insight as well. And for all of you who are listening, think through what we've talked about today. If you're unhappy, if you're burned out with your corporate career, if you're wondering you can do something different in addition to, the answer is why not? So Pete is there for you. If you have questions, by all means, reach out to him. He'd be more than happy to talk to you on a personal level and walk you through it. With that, thank you both again, and thank you all for attending today's very special masterclass session. Bye for now.